The Olympics are going forward here in Paris, France, but you know what's not moving ahead, at least not at the time of this recording. Matty Beniers' contract. Let's talk about that and a few other topics on today's episode of Locked On Kraken.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Erica L. Ayala here, live from the Media Center at the 2024 Paris Olympics. And yes, we are back in action. We'll talk about that a little bit. But first, I want to let you know that today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. As we know, it is summertime. The Olympics are ramping up. The WNBA and NWSL will continue action in about a month's time. And so FanDuel has something for all customers every single day. That's right. FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. Where we're going to get started is with the obvious. Now, we went through this song and dance last season with Vince Dunn, but we are already 12 days beyond the signing date for Vince Dunn when he got that 4-year deal. Vince Dunn re-signed with the Seattle Kraken on July 21st. I'm recording here. It's almost 8 o'clock p.m. on August 2nd in Paris, at least. And still no deal for Matty Beniers. Now, I think there are a few different things that we have to keep in mind when trying to compare, if you even can, what happened with Vince Dunn and what's going on with Matty Beniers. So first and foremost, Vince Dunn already has a Stanley Cup and is a proven guy, came in more to be a veteran than anything. Not the case with Matty Beniers. Now, while Matty Beniers, of course, does not have a title to his name, he does have Rookie of the Year, and that's not nothing. That's definitely something that is going to be a part of his resume. But what's also true is that the Seattle Kraken, and yes, Matty Beniers, did indeed slump. They were not performing very well. We've talked about that ad nauseum at this point in time on the podcast. And so I think there's an interesting article that I'm taking a look at right now from Rob Simpson, who, if you're a part of the media corps or just kind of around the Seattle Kraken, you probably have seen Rob. He's definitely in the media scrums. And he's talking about what Kraken center Matty Beniers deserves regarding money. And, he talks about, of course, the drop off for the 21-year-old centerman. And he went from 57 points last season. We were a playoff contender, 37 points this season. 20 points is extremely significant. And we've talked about this again ad nauseum. Was it because he was asked to do things that a centerman does? I mean, he's a centerman. He should be focused on winning faceoffs, especially the way the Seattle Kraken have performed. Was he being asked to do too much on defense? I think those are all the wrong questions. I think the issue is the same issue that I say that we have with putting all of our eggs in the Burakovsky basket. You are setting a centerman up. You are setting an elite, scorer up to be the only options, or at least the most go-to options. Now we know we can be a gritty Seattle Kraken team at times. That being said, we've also talked ad nauseum about how last season we lost a lot of that grit and sandpaper, if you will, as Ryan Donato used to say. For those everydayers and OGers, you know how I feel about Ryan Donato. Too long didn't read, too long didn't listen, didn't watch to all the other episodes. I love Ryan Donato's game. I think he has exactly the edge that has been missing from the Seattle Kraken, and we need more of that. Yanni Gourde has a little bit of that in a little bit of a different way, and we're going to talk about Yanni Gourde a little bit later in the episode. But a down season for the Kraken, a down season for Matty Beniers. Now, is it because he was focusing on other elements of his game? I think that's a little bit weak sauce. I think it was just a down year for everyone. I think that when you have a down season and the offense is effectively stagnant, players like Matty Beniers, players like Andre Burakovsky, they're going to suffer even more, because if they are not playmaking for themselves and other people aren't helping to playmake for them, then they're easy targets for the defense. And I think a little bit of that goes into, another season for Matty B. You come off of a rookie year, everyone's kind of got you at the top of the scouting report. So, I think there are a few things, but it definitely didn't help when it comes to the negotiations. And so, Rob goes into a little bit actually of the history of Matty's contract and, kind of signing that entry level contract, doing those 10 first games in that, true rookie year, I guess you want to call it, and how that might have impacted at least his ability to negotiate. He talks about Quinn Hughes, who did the same thing, also coming out of Michigan, signed a NHL contract in the spring. He played 5 fewer games. But Rob goes on to say, quote, if Beniers hadn't signed early, this coming season would be the 3rd year of his entry-level contract. And that would give the Kraken another full campaign to assess where the player fits and just how much value he brings. Now, why is that significant? Because the Seattle Kraken got rid of a coach, signed really lengthy contracts in free agency. And so the cap space is a little bit diminished. And so if you wanted to see a deal like we saw for Vince Dunn, which again was 4 years, $29.4 million contract, you're not necessarily going to get that. One, like I've already mentioned, Matty Beniers and Vince Dunn, at least not right now, and maybe not ever on their trajectory at the same exact time, they're not the same player. That's a $7.35 million AAV for Vince Dunn. Now, would Matty Beniers like a contract like that? Yes, but we've already talked about that. He's not getting an $8 million contract. That's out the window. 7 seems a little steep given where the Seattle Kraken are, not just with their salary cap, but also performance. And so some parts of me wonders if, just by circumstance, if Matty Beniers and his camp are a little bit handcuffed. And, that is something, again, that Rob talks about in his article. Seattle needs to sign the RFA, restricted free agent Beniers. He has no arbitration rights, and that thus the team ultimately is controlling his destiny, Rob writes. Now, that doesn't mean Beniers is not without options, and we're kind of seeing them. What he and his agent can do, Pat Brisson, is to hold out. If they don't like the deal on the table, then they'll just wait till they get a good deal. And I think that's what we're seeing. But the Seattle Kraken salary cap is not helping the situation. The Seattle Kraken salary cap is about 6.3 per Puckpedia. The Seattle Kraken projected cap space is 6.3 million. And the projected and current are exactly the same. So, that's already less than Vince Dunn got. Is it less than what Matty Beniers deserves? I don't know. Again, that's where the numbers and the circumstance aren't really, if I'm being honest, quite in Beniers' favor. He's not going to get that 7.3 AAV. I don't think that that's the contract that the Seattle Kraken are going to give. He really has to be lower than 6 because of what the Seattle Kraken have regarding salary cap, unless, of course, other moves are made, which we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I want to go back to Rob's article here. He feels that what Beniers will get will be something in the mid to high 5s, 5 million, and that would be AAV, I'm assuming. And he goes on to say, Kraken GM Ron Francis might want to save a bit of his $6.3 million in cap space for some flexibility in adding more depth along the blue line or elsewhere. Now, you know, I'm all about adding depth to the blue line. And I think also we're going to hear from Locked On NHL Prospects. That's still a glaring need when looking at the prospects and, quite honestly, the roster through and through. But we'll get to that. So, are we going to see Matty Beniers sign this contract? Are we seeing the Kraken go lower than 5? I wouldn't be surprised, given just kind of how they operate. They like to be, I would say, a little more on the conservative or frugal side. Is Matty Beniers, in theory, worth more than that? Probably. And so what we also need to figure out, and I guess what the two camps are trying to decide, is what's the right term? Because there's not a lot of money necessarily, at least not right now, to deal Matty B more than mid to high 5s. And that's really pushing the cap. And so even if that deal is potentially on the table, regardless of the term, I wonder also if we are seeing what we see sometimes. I cover a lot of basketball. I'm here at the Olympics covering basketball. What you'll see sometimes is a player they'll get their qualifying offer, as Matty Beniers did, and they will wait to sign an official contract. Brianna Stewart just did this for the New York Liberty because they're giving the team time to make some adjustments, make some moves, maybe offload some salary so then they can figure out what makes sense. Now, a lot of times this will be veteran players that do this, and they'll do that because they'll actually take a little bit less so that they can get a little bit more on the roster. But I guess in theory, right, you could also do it the other way. Now, how invested the Seattle Kraken is doing that, I don't know. Again, down season for Matty B, but you have to think, do the Seattle Kraken really think that that's where Matty Beniers is going to stay? And it's hard because I don't think that the Seattle Kraken want Matty B to leave or to give him a shorter term contract with sour grapes, and potentially he leaves when he's at his peak, at his prime. I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen. But what you also don't want to do is overpay someone who maybe is not going to deliver. But also, why then did the Seattle Kraken sign those 7-year contracts? And yes, I know I've talked about it. Other people have talked about it. There's ways to kind of finagle out of those. And I do think I see value in having some veterans. But at the end of the day, eventually, the Seattle Kraken are going to have to hand over the keys. I say this a lot on my New York Liberty podcast. It's time to hand the keys over to Sabrina Ionescu, and that's in the works. It's almost time to hand the keys to Matty Beniers, in my opinion. But there are a few things that need to happen. And that's what makes this contract, in my estimation, a little bit difficult, because Matty Beniers not quite ready to take the driver's seat, in my opinion. The Seattle Kraken not quite ready to have a full youth movement, but they do need to start to get the youth, moving and getting into the lineup and into the roster and onto the roster, excuse me. So that's what we're going to talk about next. And then we'll close out talking about a potential trade, a trade rumor. And it's a player that we talked about before. I'm not really liking the return, but I think it's worth talking about this player yet again, and might actually fit into, at least from the rumors, what we're hearing, the return might actually fit into what we're going to talk about coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED lights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you want to be running rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. The eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available for U.S. customers. Désolé. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Erica L. Ayala here, live from the Media Center. This is the main hub here, open 24 hours. And today is a work day. I'm finally getting my schedule back on track and happy to talk some Seattle Kraken. So we talked about Matty Beniers. And now I want to talk about the youth movement. We're going to hear from Sebastian from Locked On NHL Prospects. Our last episode, we did a breakdown of the most recent draft class, and Sebastian has done actually our whole prospect pool. There are some pieces that I want to go back to, especially when it comes to defensive prospects, because I think a lot of them, as Sebastian talks about, we are expecting to see a decent amount of them in the AHL. But I think whether it's defensive prospects or forwards, there are some prospects that can really push the issue when it comes to the roster this season. And remember, there's a new head coach, a head coach that has been with the Coachella Valley Firebirds and the Charlotte Checkers before that, who understands a lot of these prospects and their game and can evaluate them in real time. Actually, there's two coaches that can do that. That, of course, is Disco Dan Bilesma, our new head coach, and assistant coach Jessica Campbell. So there's a lot of potential here. And so if ever you're going to throw the keys to a young team, this could be the year. But I just get the sense that the culture for the Seattle Kraken is still a little bit more conservative. I think if we even look at a free agency, sure, we made some moves on the first day. Sure, they were long-term deals, but they were still conservative. The point is, I think we can step on the gas a little bit more. I've been saying this for years. And after you make the playoffs, get to the second round, go to the seventh game in the second round, and then the very next season you don't make the playoffs, if now is not the time to pump on the gas, then I really don't know what's going on. The only reason that you might not do that, just use this extended metaphor, because why the heck not, is if you feel that you're a little out of control, right? Sometimes you hit the gas and things don't quite work out, but you go after it again. Sometimes you hit the gas and you spin out, right? You just had no control. You don't know where you're going. There's no direction. I mean, I could see that being how the Seattle Kraken feel, if I'm being honest. So maybe we want to get back to basics, go back to 10-2. It's been a while since I've taken driver's ed. Apparently they don't have yet 10-2 anymore. I never really stayed there much myself anyway. It was all 12 o'clock all day, one hand. Anyway, the youth movement. I think it's intriguing, and there is a lot of talent in our prospect pool. I think we could go super young with this team if we wanted, sprinkling in Salt Bay style a few key proven veterans, and it would be probably a frustrating team to watch early on, but also with brushes of brilliance, as I like to say. I think there's a lot of excitement that can come through the pipeline. But as you're going to hear from Sebastian, and I tend to agree with him, there's a little bit more of a conservative approach when it comes to developing the Seattle Kraken in their pipeline. And, I guess we'll see what theory prevails once we get a little closer to training camp. But here is Sebastian on our prospect pool and why maybe it's time for a youth movement, or will be really soon.
wrap up this episode here for the Seattle Kraken, and let's look ahead, because this is an interesting team, because this is a team that made the playoffs and won a playoff round against the Colorado Avalanche just over a season ago, and they're young and ever improving. And while they missed the playoffs this past season, ended up picking 8th overall, of course, netting Berkeley Catton at the draft, I think that this team could contend for the playoffs, especially because they are in the Western Conference, which has a lot more openings than the East does, especially in the Atlantic, which is just an absolute battle royale at the moment. But I'm curious to see what giving the reins to the young centers of this organization will do to elevate this team overall. In Matty Beniers and Shane Wright, you have 2 players that play the game with a high degree of intelligence and contribute a lot defensively, as well as in building play up incrementally in order to create offense, and are also very effective cycle players. So I think building around those 2 cornerstones down the middle is going to be very important for their success as soon as this year. And with the amount of veteran depth that this team has accumulated, I think they will be very well supported, whether it be guys like Chandler Stevenson, who can also play down the middle, or like Andre Burakovsky and Oliver Bjorkstrand and McCann. And you have so many players on the offensive court. Yanni Gourde gives a lot of that defensive value as well from a third line role, which could free up one of Beniers and Wright to play a bit more offensively as well. There's a lot to kind of play around with this forward core specifically. And on the defensive side of things, they added Brandon Montour to already a defensive core that had Vince Dunn as an offensive blue liner. And now you have 2 of them that are likely going to be playing on separate pairings, being really strong puck movers and being able to progress play into the offensive zone, as well as providing goal scoring and overall playmaking threat when they are in the offensive zone, whether it be at even strength or on the power play. The hope will also be for this blue line production to be able to rise as a whole with the addition of Montour, and also a hope that Joey Decord can continue his highly strong play in the crease for Seattle. I mean, he had a .916 save percentage this past season with a pretty heavy workload, playing, I believe, just over 50 games for Seattle, and was a real breakout star for that team. And as long as he and Philip Grubauer can still hold down the crease for Seattle, I think there's a real fighting chance for this team to do some damage and get into the playoffs this season. Of course, you still have a lot of young players on the wings that will be waiting to make that leap into the NHL. Whether that happens right away, I don't quite know. Like guys like Jagger Firkus could contend to win a spot out of training camp, but there's so many veterans in those spots in that lineup that I think 1 or 2 of them would have to be moved in order to create that opening for young players to step into. And giving those guys a year or 2 to develop in the AHL, it seems to be the strategy that this team is employing with their prospects. We've been seeing that with Shane Wright. We've been seeing it with Riker Evans as well. And that patient approach, I think, will pay dividends in the long term, though it means that Seattle fans might have to wait a little bit longer than they want to in order to see their dynamic young talents skating at the NHL level. I think one of the big things on the agenda for Seattle this season will be to give their young stars a lot of trust to make mistakes and to learn this season. They're going to be insulated a lot by so many veterans, and that is a luxury, and it frees them up to be able to take some more risks. And I would love to see Matty Beniers and Shane Wright and guys like Riker Evans and even Evie Tolvanen to take those risks and just try to be a bit more dynamic offensively, to push their limits, to figure out how much they can really create at the NHL level against high levels of competition. And I think if they're able to do that and foster an environment where they're able to push their offensive boundaries, you could see Beniers' point total jump up to a 60-point level, maybe 20 goals. Shane Wright could hit 20 goals and 45 points in his first season as a full-time NHLer, I think, with the right support, with the right type of deployment, both at even strength and on special teams. And I think that a guy like Riker Evans could also really chip in with some nice depth offense from the blue line, maybe logging 5 goals goals and 25 points this upcoming season. Apart from that, most of the players in this lineup are going to be veterans, but I still want to make a couple more point projections for some guys here. So I picked out Ty Cartier, who I think could take a leap in his development this season. He now has just over a year of NHL experience under his belt, including that really strong playoff run just over a season ago. And I think that if he's able to entrench himself as a third line scorer, maybe logging 15 goals, 30 points, that this team could also help take a next step, which would also push another veteran one slot further down the lineup and really give them a strong fourth line basis to rely on, whether it be in difficult games and gritty games or when injuries arise and they need players to fill up in that top nine. And last but not least, I would love to see Tolvanen also take a step in his development. We've seen that in this past season after being claimed off of waivers from the Nashville Predators, that he has a real goal-scoring touch and offensive dynamism. And while there's still a lot of holes in his game, he could be a strong depth contributor, more in that Daniel Sprong mold, who gets a really high-end degree of per 60 production and goal-scoring threat, despite being relatively insulated at even strength, but also gets those power play minutes where his tools can shine brightest. If he's able to score 20 goals and 45 points this season, I think Seattle has a very nice chance of making the playoffs.
Wow, Seb gave us a lot there, and a lot that I absolutely love, including, you know how I feel about Ellie Tolvanen. Yes to Matty Beniers. He talks about Shane Wright earlier in that episode. Again, we'll have some of the snippets talking a little bit more about Shane Wright, but I love the conversation about Ty Cartier. Riker Evans also talks about a little bit more earlier in the episode, and we'll get to that as we continue to talk about prospects. But yes, to the idea and to the notion that the Seattle Kraken right now on paper are definitely more of a veteran team. And you know me, I love me some OGs. I really, really do. And I think it's time to lean into the youth movement. And just like Sebastian said, as I said earlier on this episode, you can't really do both right now. Not the way the Seattle Kraken have their salary cap. Now, if the projections on salary cap increasing over the next handful of years, you know, that might be something. And again, it already increased. So they're already dealing with an increase and managing that increase. But, you know, you have to figure out what is the right sprinkle of veterans. I'm in Paris or in France, so you know, I am in Paris, but I'm in France. And so I've been thinking a lot about Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, and I like what he offers from a veteran perspective. But if you're not going to get a team that can be offensively gifted, or at least more gifted than they were last year, then he's not the right kind of veteran. As an example, if you need more grit and sandpaper, you might want to keep Yanni Gourde. But if the team is moving towards more finesse, can you maybe move Yanni Gourde to get something that's going to fit a little bit better? These are the questions that the Seattle Kraken have to ask. And it does feel to me like at least what I hope and what I believe should be at the center of this potential hybrid rebuild for the Seattle Kraken is, of course, Matty Beniers. But coming up next, I want to talk about a trade rumor that involves someone that I just talked about and maybe could offload some money. The return, as I said earlier, I'm not in love with, but maybe that's negotiable. But I want to hear what you think about this potential trade, the trade rumor, and if and how that could help the Seattle Kraken with where they want to be in the near future and beyond. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. It's the summer months. Have no fear. Sports is still here. I'm at the biggest tournament multiple times over in the world right now in Paris, France, covering the Olympics. I'm covering mostly women's basketball, 3x3, finally stringing some wins together, putting themselves in position to move forward. The men's team has to get a little bit of work done on the 3x3 side. On 5-on-5, you already know, USA is dominating, but I really like what Germany's been able to do in the women's bracket. South Sudan has done some things also on the men's side, Canada as well. But this is the great thing about FanDuel. even though we know that football is getting ready to gear up, hockey season, we still got to wait another month until we're properly in hockey season. FanDuel has something for you and new customers every single day because the sports, they keep sports in. I'm proof positive. I'm watching all of the sports right now. So here's what I want you to do. Head over to FanDuel, create an account, make the most of your summer. If you look at just the Olympics, just on the women's side, you can choose future bets such as who's going to win the gold. I think we're probably all saying the United States. But what about silver and bronze? France and Germany, those might be two teams. Can't forget about Spain. Think they're an underrated team right now, but I still like France and Germany a little bit better. So head over to FanDuel. France right now minus 120 to win silver, Spain plus 600, Germany women plus 500. You can find all that and more at FanDuel. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball and us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Erica L. Ayala here, coming to you live from Paris, France. I'm at the Olympics once again. This is the second time that I've recorded the podcast. I've covered it from a different country before, but this is the second time I've covered it at an Olympics, first time at a summer games. There was a little connect I saw on NHL.com/Kraken regarding the summer games and one of our support staff. And we're going to get into that next week, I think, because I want to talk about a trade rumor. I've been talking about Yanni Gourde, and if you saw on social media, there's actually, I do not speak French. I hardly speak English, but that's a story for another day. But they gave us these recyclable water bottles. This is the official water bottle. Coca-Cola sponsored, of course, the official water bottle that's given to media members, and the players, and I think maybe volunteers have a different one. I actually also have that one because I love water bottles. Can never have enough water bottles. Is it going to fit in my luggage? That's a whole nother story. But anyway, but there's a big sustainability kick, ecological Olympics here in Paris, France. And so I've been seeing the word gourd all over the place. And I took a picture and I posted, or a video, right by the Eiffel Tower. And it's like, I forget what the saying is now, but apparently gourd is the term used for reusable water bottle. So yeah, there's always a Kraken connection, not just Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, who actually is not on the Seattle Kraken officially, but, you know, I might talk a little bit more about that next week. I want to talk about Yanni Gourde. I've been kind of talking about him with regard to, if not specifically from trade rumors I've seen reported, just in that, if you're gonna offload some stuff, Yanni Gourde seems like he could be the guy. I think it was The Athletic that talks about potentially moving Yanni Gourde. And yes, this is what The Athletic says about Yanni Gourde. He's fiery spark plug. He has a fiery spark plug playing style, excellent defensive chops, and secondary offensive production make him a very appealing as a third line center candidate. Normally, he'd be off limits, but given his age, 32, his contract status, 1 year left at $5.16 million, and the dip in his offense, 33 points, and Shane Wright emerging, there is a scenario in which Yanni Gourde could become available. Some may be worried about his offensive drop in 23-24, but a look under the hood suggests it was primarily due to bad luck. And of course, this is my favorite part of the article because it justifies everything that I was saying to you in the regular season, not just about Yanni Gourde, but about the Yanni Gourde line, or at least the majority of the time when he spent his time on the ice centering Oliver Bjorkstrand and Ellie Tolvanen. Gourde's line generated shots and scoring chances at a nearly identical rate to 22-23 when he scored 48 points compared to, as I mentioned just now, his 33 points last season. They only scored 6.4% of their 5-on-5 shots. Bad luck. Yeah, bad luck. We saw a little bit of that. Poor Ollie, even in the All-Star game. Anyway, there's a decent chance he'll bounce back offensively, which, coupled with his ace penalty-killing results and grit, could be an enticing opportunity. So why am I mentioning Yanni Gourde? I love Yanni Gourde. I think I like all of the things that were said in that article. And I want to say this very clearly. Do I think Yanni Gourde and Shane Wright are easily interchangeable? No, absolutely not. I like the upside of Shane Wright, but I don't think he replaces Yanni Gourde. And if you do trade Yanni Gourde, then you are losing basically all of that sandpaper, in my estimation. So I'm not like in love with getting rid of Yanni Gourde, especially for what we've been hearing. There is talks about getting in a trade with the Detroit Red Wings, trading Yanni Gourde for Jonathan Berggren. Younger guy, so that would fit into the youth movement. A lot of potential offensively. That scares me a little bit because we don't need potential. We need actual offense. That being said, we have a coaching staff that is committed to development. And if we are going to go into this youth movement era of the Seattle Kraken, does that mean that we're a little bit into our hybrid rebuild and we're willing to take a few steps forward or a few steps back to take even more forward and just reset the philosophy? I'm thinking we might need to do that, to be honest. And I'm thinking that there might be some more moves that the Seattle Kraken need to make. I don't have Yanni Gourde at the top of my list when it comes to that, but I can totally understand it. Now, here's the thing. You also have to think about it doesn't make financial sense. And if we look at the roster breakdown right now, Yanni Gourde, unrestricted free agent, I mentioned that earlier, 5.16. So that you get some of that back. How much of that do you want to reserve with whatever cap space you have to potentially give to Matty B? How much, are you going to give to whoever you get, whether it's Detroit or whatever else? Can you be under 3? I don't know. With what you actually have to give up, because there's all kinds of other things, like how much of the salary is going to be, are we going for picks? Like what are we doing here? I think it's intriguing. Another player to take a look at. So we know we have McCann on contract. We just re-signed Tolvanen. We just re-signed Eberle. And of course, on the defensive side, Vince Dunn. You don't mess with Karts, in my opinion, or Shane, but also we're not even talking a million when we get to those players. Bjorky, nope. Don't want to see it. Might we have to entertain it down the road? Sure. But right now, I say we keep Bjorkstrand. Burakovsky at 5.5, not likely. I don't know what else I want to say about Andre Burakovsky. I feel like I've made my stance pretty clear. Don't have anything against the guy. It's just not working. And it's not his fault necessarily. I do think he tries to do a little too much sometimes. But I would argue that that's probably because of the roster. And that's on the big bosses. Anyway, Jaden Schwartz also at 5.5. I love Jaden Schwartz. I really do. And, I'm curious, especially, I feel like this is more of a trade deadline situation, what the future for Jaden looks like. Maybe that's a veteran that's not quite the right fit. And I hate to say it, but maybe that's a veteran that's not quite the right fit. So, I'm very intrigued to see what the Seattle Kraken are actually going to do, what they are committed to doing. And I guess we just wait and see if and how this impacts Matty Beniers. I mean, I don't see how it doesn't. I also think that whatever happens with Matty Beniers and or any of the veterans that I mentioned is going to have implications for leadership down the road. Got a new coach, new coaching staff. We don't have a captain right now. How long is that going to last? But if we're just plugging holes instead of committing to the rebuild, hybrid rebuilds, whatever you want to call it, do we want another situation where we name a captain and then that captain's gone? Lots to think about, my friends, but that's going to do it for this Friday episode of Locked On Kraken. The new Coachella Valley Firebirds head coach was officially introduced this week. We didn't get around to it because I'm in Paris covering the Olympics. We'll talk about that next week. So lots still to talk about. I do want to get back to exit interviews. That's actually the connection that the Seattle Kraken staff has to the Paris Olympics. So we'll talk about that next week. What do the exit interviews look like? What is the ask for players in the offseason? Things of that nature. I do want to talk a little bit more about Pierre-Edouard Bellemare. And I kind of said what I feel about that. It's not looking good for the guy. But again, what kind of veterans? What's the right balance between veterans and just opening that door for a full-on youth movement? Be kind to yourselves. Be kind to one another. Hold fast. Stay true. And loud and proud, we say always, let's go Kraken. I'll catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody. Enjoy your weekend. I know I sure will.